Okay, so I have been getting a lot of requests on asking me when I bind, these are some of my sketchbooks, when I bind some of these books, how do I do the sewing? And I did do a video, which I'll put a little card up here, there maybe, about how I think it's of me binding this particular book, but I kind of sped through the sewing part of it, and I wanted to go through today how that's done. So I'll start in a little more depth. So I'll start by telling you how it's planned out. So if I want my book to be, the pages to be about this wide, first of all, you have to figure out what side the grain, which way the grain moves in your paper. Paper always has a grain. It either goes this way or this way. I don't know which way it goes on this piece, so you pretty much just bend it, and I get a lot more resistance this way, which tells me that the grain is actually going this way, because it bends with the grain much easier. It does not bend against it. So you're going to want to make the spine of your book with the grain, because over time it bends a little bit, and you want it to be able to bend. You don't want, if it bends the wrong way when it's bound together, it could loosen and break your spine over time. So you want to make sure the grain of the paper goes vertically in the book. So I hope that's somewhat clear. Anyway, so that's what you want to think about before you cut down your paper. For this 90-pound watercolor paper, I generally only use 2 per signature. 2 pages together are called the signature, and then you sew these together to create your text block, which is what all of them together are. This is the text block. All of the signatures sewn together. I hope it's focusing on that. And so what I was going to do is, I always start with a jig. I make my own little jig. And I do that for this case, for this particular binding. I use these linen tapes. Tape just meaning flat, sort of, I don't know how else to describe it. It's like linen, and the cotton works well too. It comes in these rolls, and there are different widths and sizes and stuff. And you've got to plan your signatures. I don't know the terminology for anything, but you want to plan how you're going to sew this together correctly, otherwise it won't work. And so what I do is, you can kind of see how I have the holes measured out here. This is where the string is going to go. You can see it in this signature. So it comes outside and through, and outside and through, and in between this, it's holding onto one of these in the back. Each time you go in and out, it holds on to one of these linen tapes. Okay, it's not adhesive tape. You're going to glue this later, but so these linen tapes are held together simply by the pressure of your sewing. Okay, and I also use linen threads. These are usually Irish linen. This is a dyed color. This is thinner. I don't know if you can tell the difference. This is much thinner, and this is a little bit thicker, and this is even more thick. The thicker it is, the harder it is to sew, I think, because sometimes you get little knots in the thread and they get caught while you're sewing. So this is kind of an ideal thickness. If it's too thin, sometimes when you're tugging it tight, it'll rip straight through your signature, and that sucks because you got to throw that whole one away and start that whole page over, and it's a huge mess. So it takes a lot of practice to do this, but once you get it, you get it. And as long as you're patient with it, it should work. You'll notice here I have, where was that? I just saw that. In between substance, so you can only use a certain. My arm is only so long, and I use a certain length of thread because as long as my arm is long, or however you say that. And then while I'm sewing, I purposefully tie it off and start a new one right in the middle. That's why one reason the middle is a little bit longer. Because if the thread's too long, it's too easy to get twisted and make a knot somewhere along the line while you're sewing, and knots suck. You never want a knot. You've got to take your time and go be patient and go slowly. That's one reason I didn't include the sewing portion on my initial how to make my pain in the ass sketchbooks, because sewing takes a really long time and you've got to be really patient. So anyway, what I generally do is you want a little bit of space in between the end of the page, the end of the top and the bottom of your page. You'll see here. Because you don't want, if this is too small, it's going to be too easy to rip out the back, rip out the end. If it's too long, it won't be stable. So I usually keep about, I think that's a ½ inch. You can go a ¼ inch depending on what kind of book you have and how thick the paper is. So you can see how it lines up pretty well with this ruler, with my ½ inches. I have, so, and I measured it like this. I could have gone a little tighter even, but these are about a ½ inch thick linen tapes. So the reason I did it in ½ inches is because, remember, I'm going to sew out and then in, which I'll show you in a minute, hold the tape in place, out, in, so that eventually the back of the text block, how am I doing that? No, it's here and here and here, will look like this. Here, these get trimmed later, here and here, okay? You always have to skip one in the end because, and I'm going to show you the direction that the thread is going to go. This is the outside, so the thread is going to go in this way, around, oh, what am I doing? Oh, no tape here because the tapes come on the outside, right? So then this is inside and it comes out again and it goes through, and this is where you tug that tight. That's going to go around this tape, right? And it's going to be nice and tight there. And then it's going to go out. This is imagine this going on the other side and around another linen tape, and then a little bit longer here, out, and then around another piece of linen tape and out. Remember, this is sometimes on the other side where I tie that off in the middle when the strings, when the thread ends, while in the middle of while you're sewing. Out, this tape would go here. I hope you can see this. Out, out, out. And as it comes out, you need to be able to. If you have the wrong number of holes punched in the spine of your signature, it's going to end up going in, and where you're going to go from there. You can't sew another one. You can't sew this one to this one if it's inside. If it's in the middle of the signature somehow. So you've got to time these. You've got to sort of plan this out properly and with some care. So this is basically the plan for this. And so what I do with this jig, after I figure out what I want, how I want to sew it together, I take my pages that are already folded. Remember that the grain goes vertically, and I put two together. I didn't sew. This is an extra one because I fucked up the hole punching thing there, but this is also a really, 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 really helpful thing that I do. When I have, these are my pages that are all going to be sewn together, right? When I have them all folded 2 at a time, so each of these signatures has just 2 pages inside. So this makes, I guess, 4 pages, 8 on each side. I don't know if you can see it, but I make a really faint little pencil X on every single one of these, because that helps me a couple times down the road when later on in the process, you can see the X's here too. So these all line up together. This X and this X, right? This X, oops, that shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be there. I guess it doesn't matter as long as it's on the right side. if these pages ever, when you're sewing them together, they get turned around, these holes they look the same on each side, but they're not exactly, and it can make the book kind of not line up properly when you're sewing it all together. So that's why I always have this light little X that's super easy to erase later on. I'm sure like professional bookbinders would call me a poser for doing that, but whatever, helps me. And the way I punch, I don't know if you can see, but each of these signatures has these holes punched according to this jig. And the way I did it was, let's say, oh shoot, see, these just came, I just lost track of these, and now I just have to look for the X and the X, and I can put them back together with this X, and I know they're gonna line up properly. So let's say, just for argument's sake, this was a signature that I wanted to, two signatures together that I want, let's just pretend there's two together that I wanted to punch. So I would line this up with one edge, make sure it's all the way pushed down all the way edge to edge inside there. This gets a little tricky because if it pops out a little bit, you end up with this. It came out the side a little bit, and it can still be kind of sewn together, but it looks crappy, and it won't be quite as strong in the end. So hold it nice and tight. And this is kind of funny. This is a intravenous needle, but you can use whatever you need to punch the holes through this stuff. I have to resharpen this every once in a while. But I don't know if you can see, let's see, yeah. So I put it on a piece of 1/2-inch foam core. You don't have to use 1/2-inch foam core, but, and you have to keep making sure that it doesn't move. You get to do this really fast after you get good at it. It doesn't move around, and it's lined up corner to corner, or I guess back edge to back edge. And you're just using your jig and punching where your measurements are supposed to be. Whoops, that was not right. And then you'll notice that they should all line up, and these all line up properly. And if I had drawn my little X there, then it can come out of order, and I don't have to keep track of everything so closely, and I can put it back in order, and it will fit again. I sometimes just use a needle to do that, depending on how many I have and how thick the paper is. This was one that I used. I just put masking tape on the edge of it, and I can just keep punching it like this, and it's really easy on my fingers. Just using a needle with this thick paper can be really hard on your finger after a while. And if it's hard on your finger and it's not easy to do after a while, you're gonna start screwing it up, and you're gonna start getting lazy, and it's not gonna line up anymore. So make it easy on yourself. Here's another hypodermic needle. I need to sharpen this one. No, not hypodermic. I don't know. Intravenous. I guess that's what it's called. Anyway, so this is the plan. This is my text block. This is going to be a really thick one. This is going to be another sort of sketchbook in reserve for myself. This is, again, Fabriano 90-pound hot press watercolor paper, slightly off-white. You don't need this ugly thing anymore because you're not punching holes anymore. All your holes are punched. And your X is in the upper right. So you're gonna start with the very first two signatures that you sew together. The first 1 and 2 are different from the whole rest of them. The rest of them are just one after another, all very similar. But the first couple are a little bit different, and you've got to start properly, and so that it makes it easier in the long run. So, like I said, I'm going to use this sort of medium Irish linen thread, and I'm only going about a little over 1 arm's length at a time, because the longer you do it, I'll say it again, the longer the thread is, the easier it is for it to get twisted. It gets twisted after you keep going in and out, and it will cause a knot, especially if you're sewing through something tight. and that knot can break, and it's a nightmare. You do not want knots. And so one thing that helps you sew is beeswax. This is a weird look. I don't even understand why they sew it like this. I don't think you need it. But this is like a little puck of beeswax. It comes in, sometimes you can get it in these weird beeswax thread coating things. And so I like to run it through, oh, see? This is it's got all twisted, and it could have caused a knot. But so one of the reasons you thread it through the beeswax is to sort of make it untwist naturally so that it's kind of relaxed, because you don't want it to be twisty when you're sewing, and B, because you want it to stay in place. When you're sewing, you don't want it to move around too much, and this helps it stay in place, and it doesn't screw up the paper over time, and it's archival. I've gone through a lot of beeswax over time, but this is just like more natural, non-bleached beeswax. It doesn't show up on the thread. And I usually just do this, just like that. And the best thing about beeswax is you get on your fingers and you snap. It's like the best snapping substance for your fingers. You can snap really loud and fast. So in case you ever are going to do some snapping performances, I highly recommend beeswax first. Okay, so after you beeswax it up, take your, these are long, I guess these are specifically for books. It's a pretty dull needle. You don't want it super sharp, because if it's super sharp, it'll start poking. You want it to like slide around in the paper a little bit. If you're poking around to get to a hole, it can make its own hole, as opposed to one you've pre-drilled, if it's too sharp. So you want to keep it, you want these kind of duller book needles. This is a pretty big one. The way I thread it, you don't want to thread it all the way down like this and tie a knot. That's too thick. You're going to make your holes too wide. So I generally take the thread. Let's see if you can maybe see it better. Let's see, can you see better? Yeah, I guess. Maybe. Yeah. So I generally take, is that too shiny? No. I take the thread and I go twice the size of the needle, and I twist it. So this thread is actually, I think, 3 pieces of thread twisted together. I twist it until they all come apart, and then I push it in between some of those other threads. This is a cool trick. And then pull it down over the needle. So it's kind of stuck on itself. And then I wax it a little more, because it does wear down on this part of the thread as you're sewing. That's another reason I don't like to have too long of a thread, because that will eventually wear down and break. You don't want it to break while you're sewing, because it can screw everything up. You want to have total control over when you cut the thread and how twisty it gets. Hopefully not at all. So here's my brand new signature. And I'm going to start by poking the back. Remember, we're going, that's what this is right here, out. Then we're going to hold the linen thread in, around, right? So, it's wax on my finger. Pull it out to about a little over the length of the needle, maybe 2 needle lengths. The longer it is, the more likely it is to get caught up while you're sewing the signatures together. The shorter it is, the chances you have a chance of it slipping out while you're sewing, neither of which are fun to have happen. Back through. Okay, so it's a little bit taut, but not tight. Put your linen tape in place. Can't go fast here. You got to be really patient. And then back through. I do a little pre-poke there, just to make it a little bit easier to find it through both signatures. once you're going this way again when your tape is in place. I put the needle in my mouth sometimes when I'm doing this part. Some people like to have like a pin cushion or something and just stick it somewhere, stick it in a chair next to you, whatever. You just don't want the needle to drop and lose track of it. Usually this changes, but depending on what side you hold it on, it'll make it easier depending on what you're doing. So I'm holding it on the right side. I'm trying to pinch lightly so the two signatures stay together and they don't move around because these holes have to stay lined up. It's really easy to accidentally rip the paper between the two holes, and that really sucks. So try not to do that. I think I mentioned before, you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You have to know when to pull tight and when not to pull tight. Okay, so those are all in place. Maybe we can just do a few pre-pokes for the rest of these, make it a little easier on ourselves. So now this is going straight through. Now I switched sides. I'm holding it on this side. Oops, sorry. You kind of have to concentrate when you're doing this. Sometimes if I talk too much, I start to lose track of what I'm doing and I screw up. These could have been tighter, closer together. I kind of wish they were, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. As long as you do a really good job sewing, you should be fine. If they're too far apart, it won't be quite as strong. And I'm talking strong over a period of a year of using a sketchbook. So that takes it can take a lot of wear and tear if you do it right. And you know, after you use your sketchbook heavily for a year, then you kind of put it away, and you don't have to worry about wear and tear anymore because you're not opening and closing it and stuffing it in your backpack and stuff anymore. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna stop talking for a sec. So now you've got this much thread left over, which is good. That means you can get a couple more signatures in. You're not going to need any, this is all the linen thread you're going to need. You can put the linen thread away, get it out of the way. It's always good to get stuff out of the way so it's not cluttering up your workspace. You can kind of pull these a little bit tight. Again, anything you pull too tight at this point can rip the pages. So let's keep track of, we want to remember where our X is. So I'm going to flip it back over, get my thread and needle over here, and you notice how I added more room here than here? That's because the pages are going to build up down here and there's going to be extra room so that these will be closer to the same. You don't want to have to move these around much. This is going to get really tight with these linen tapes here. You don't want to have to move those around if possible. You can if you've sewn it correctly, but you don't really want to because it's really easy to pull too hard and the whole thing comes out, and then where are you? That's like such a nightmare scenario that I don't even want to talk about it because you just won't have a piece of linen tape there and it'll be off balance, and I'm already going to have nightmares just thinking about it. So I'm lining the next signature up. Remember, X to X. These X's always help me out. And that means these are all going to line up because they were created with the same jig. So then you go straight into this one, right? Straight from the back of the last signature straight into this signature, okay? That was hanging off the edge, and now you're going to go straight into this signature. You pull it through and push it out again. This is what you're going to end up doing now for the rest of the book. for the most part. Okay, this is exactly like we did the first one. It goes through the back, out, and it makes this nice little loop in there, right? That's holding that page together. Try to hold these. Now, I try to hold these. This is a closed first signature and an open second signature, right? That's how I'm holding it right now. Now, you want to make this pattern exactly the same every time so that you end up, this is the back of one, you end up with that nice X cross. I don't know if you could see. This is like an open spine binding, but this is essentially the same method we're going to be using. So you want to keep that even and do it the exact same thing. You want to do the exact same thing every time to sew each one on. So because I'm going from this signature to this signature, I'm going from the right to the left, I always go up through this thread. Make sure you can see that okay. And this is where it gets really tricky, where you've got to make sure that you want to have waxed your thread, and you want to have, you don't want it to be twisty. So I just went straight through the thread, and now I'm going directly into the hole of that second signature. And that will, it won't look great at first, but once you get a whole bunch of them, it forms a pattern and it looks really cool, like the one I just showed you. So that just looks a little bit twisty, but just remember, and now this is where this is really, really, really important. Now at this point, I'm pinching these together. First signature closed, second signature open, and you are allowed at this point now to tug this way a little bit. Never this way. This way you will rip it straight through that signature from hole to hole. This way you won't. So you can make it, and that beeswax is now helping you because it's going to keep it in place. Once you tug a little bit, it's going to help keep it in place. So now I just keep doing the exact same thing. I'm going to go through this hole, up and out, and this way from right to left, straight through this thread, and back down through this hole again and again and again. And remember, you can pull it tight toward you inside this way, never this way. This way you can pull it nice and tight. And do it again. Do a little pre-poke on both sides. And again, this is where you want a dull needle, because if you're poking it through and it hits this linen tape, it's going to go through the middle of the linen tape if it's a sharp needle. You don't want that. You're going around the little linen tape. It's going to kind of, should be able to flow. You don't want it to, but you want it to be able to move a little bit. So I'm doing the exact same thing, left to right. Back through. Remember, I'm only pulling this way, never this way, only this way, right? Once in a while, I'll untangle the thread so that you lessen your chances of the needle twisting and causing a knot while you're sewing it through. Because as we're doing this further on with more signatures, it's going to get tighter and tighter if you're doing it right. That's a long one, right? Up through. At this point, it can, when you're tugging it tight here, it can, if it's twisted, right at this point, it can cause a knot right there, and that's scary and horrible. So you don't want that to happen. So again, the exact same thing on every piece of linen tape. Remember, I'm only pulling this way, never this way. It eventually becomes second nature, but you will screw it up. So don't use really expensive paper the first few times you try this. I've done it many times, screwed it up. Another reason, there's so many reasons to use a dull needle. Another reason is if you're poking it through again and you've got it closed, you can end up accidentally not going through both pages, only one page of the signature you're working on and through the middle of the other one, like along the edge if it's sharp. That's happened to me too, and that sucks. You don't want that to happen. And then out. And then this stitch is a little bit different. I can pull up this way, never down, up this way a little bit. And I'm just gonna do, I guess this is probably a square knot, just whatever. It doesn't really matter that much, so long as you secure it. Whoops. I do like one, and then one more. I guess that's what constitutes a square knot. I don't know. It doesn't really matter that much so long as it's secure. But I will tell you one thing. Yeah, I should have probably done a little better job there. But this knot can come undone. So one thing you might want to do, and I usually do this after I'm done sewing, is put a teeny tiny little dab of PVA, polyvinyl acetate or adhesive, glue right there so that it lessens the chance of that knot coming undone. Okay, so now which side to add more pages to, more signatures? Well, your X is there and you've got more room down here, so that's the answer, right? So you take another page off the pile and you line up your X's, make sure your X's are the same on the same side. Line it up right there. Open up your new signature that you're going to sew together. Hold the other ones tight. Maybe like do a little pre-poke there. And go straight in. And now you're just going to keep repeating yourself over and over and over again. Out. And now remember, I guess this maybe is a little different, but it's essentially the same. You want to make sure that your pattern is going to line up on every single one of these. So we want to go, we only want to sew the next linen thread sewing thing to the previous one, not both. Again, this is another reason why we want a dull needle. It would be really hard to do what I just did with a sharp needle because you'd get it stuck on stuff. So I'm only sewing it to this one. And that's what is going to make this nice pattern. And then back down through. And again, you can pull it tight one direction, but not another. Now it's starting to get a little twisty, so I'm gonna unravel it a little bit or unwind it. I do that just by holding here, holding the edge and pulling it through, and it kind of spins out. I used to yo-yo a lot, and you have to do that when you yo-yo to let the string unwind itself after a while. So again, I'm only sewing it to the next thread, not the previous one. Nice dull needle. This is where it gets it's starting to get a little tight, and that's good. You want it to be nice and tight. Again, the beeswax helps keep it in place. So one of the reasons I keep the middle a little bit extra length is because when I switch threads and I run out of this thread and I want to start a new one, I have more room to sort of center my knot when I tie the thread together, and I'll show you that when I get to it, which will be relatively soon. Oops, it gets a little tricky getting the thread, but you know what to do at this point. You don't want to get, sometimes this gets caught up inside. You don't want that to happen. Nice and clean and smooth, right? See, now it's looking ugly, but that's because the pattern hasn't really started yet. It will. Again, if you talk to a professional bookbinder, they're going to think that this sucks and there's a million better ways to do it, but hey man, works for me. I've done probably around 32 sketchbooks so far, and they're all, if I do it right, if I do what I'm telling you, they all hold up really well. They work really well. That's beeswax sticking to my finger. It smells nice too, beeswax. So it's looking good in there, right? No rips, no twists, everything's nice and tight. So for this, I generally just go up through it once and tie, and this is gonna happen on every end from now on. Up once and then go through and tie a little, go through it and go nice, tie it nice and tight. And which side to go on? X is up there, X is right there. So I'm gonna line this up here, and I know my holes will line up again. Open up the new signature, keep all the others nice and tight and closed, and go straight through. This is driving me crazy. This is a self-portrait that I did a long time ago, and that's been staring at me since I started this, so I've got to close the book. So nice and slow. Don't go too fast. You could potentially rip from one hole to the next, and that's bad, as I've said 100 times. You won't know how bad until you do it, and you will do it. It's just part of the learning process. Remember, you have to know exactly when to tug tight and when not to. If you don't tug it tight at the right places, the whole thing's going to be loose. If you tug tight in the wrong times, you're going to rip it. So you have to know when to tug, and I'll tell you again. After you sew it through and you're inside the new signature, pull it to the direction you're going, never against. It's kind of common sense because you're going to rip it straight through. The string is going this way, the thread, so pull it this way, a little bit tight. You can see the pattern starting to form now, like those Ys. Remember, I'm only going to the thread that I just did. I'm not going to any of the previous signature threads, only this last one. Get these out of the way. You got to be careful of this. This happens all the time. Yet another reason not to make your threads too long is that the beeswax eventually wears off the more you're rubbing it against itself and the book and the linen tape, and you need some beeswax on there. So if the thread's too long, you'll have rubbed the beeswax off too many times, and it won't help the thread stay in place. So it's good to be able to replace it. Some people actually really hate showing the knot tied in the middle between signatures. I like that. I love showing how stuff's made. I think that's partly because when I draw, ooh, see, that's potentially very scary, but I think we can save it. Yikes. The beeswax can make this worse sometimes. This was a pretty mild, it was just twisted. It's not a real knot. So see how it's kind of too twisty? I'm gonna unwind it a little bit at my next opportunity. So now I'm going to unwind it, and I could probably make one more before I have to replace the page. So X, open up the new signature, straight through. And again, I'm only going on the last thread. So, but in the next signature, this is where I'm going to cut the thread and I'm going to tie it to a brand new one. Brand new piece. I'll have enough for that. Actually, I could have done it right there. I'm going to cut it, getting a little close, but should be fine. In an emergency, you can sew it in between these little ones, of course on the inside only, in between, I mean in the middle of a signature, never on this side of it. Although maybe you could, I don't know, I never do. I don't think it's a good idea. For your first book, you might want to avoid having to add another thread. You might just make a short one just to practice. I mean, this is, you know, this has some pages in it. It's not insignificant, but this is going to be a pretty big, thick one. Never go too crazy making this tight either, because I have broken it off there, and once you break it there, what do? You just have to start unthreading it to the middle of this one and then retie it, and that sucks. You don't want to have to undo work that you've already done. So I'll add one more signature, and in the middle of this next signature is where I'm going to start a brand new thread. Because you can see I obviously won't even be able to make it all the way if I didn't do that. That hole's not perfect, but should be all right. It's a little awkward to do this so that the camera can see it. Usually I have it closer to my face, but I think I set the camera up so it's not too bad. Actually, the camera right now has been rubber banded. It's just my cell phone and has been rubber banded to a piece of wood that I clamped to a shelf. Okay, so now here is where we're going to start our new thread. This long sort of runway is where we're going to have a little extra room. Make sure it's a little bit tight. That beeswax should hold it on. Do not move this around because you don't want it to, it'll loosen everything up if these start to get diagonal with each other or whatever I'm trying to say. So get our thread, another like little more than arm's length. Cut it, beeswax it. Thread the needle. Twice the length of the needle. Untwist it. Stick it in between the threads after they untwist. Pull it all the way down and then wax that a little bit. And then leave the needle here. And then what you do, this is a little long. Then what I like to do, this is how I do it, obviously, because I'm doing it. Take these two ends. This is the end of the thread that you just put through your needle, and this is the end of the thread that you're sewing with. Twist them a little bit. I guess this is a square knot. I don't really know knots. So you can see it's kind of a square knot there. And then what I like to do, I mean, this is a really big runway, so it's no problem. When you have to do it in between spaces like this, you can take this, and since it's got some wax on it, you can actually pull it down and move this knot to whatever direction you want. I like to have it kind of in the middle here, so I guess we can move it up a little bit. And then just kind of tie it tight. And like I said earlier, when you start sewing and you've got this knot, I'm going to put, once it's finished, I'm going to put a little dab of glue on the knot so that it's much harder for it to come undone over time. So that's pretty good. It's like kind of right in the middle. That's just where I want it. And continue on, and now you've got a brand new piece of thread, all waxed up, freshly waxed, and you just keep going. And you do it, you can do it as many times as you want, as long as, I mean, you shouldn't make the book too thick unless you, with this method anyway, you wouldn't want to add like, make it a square, a cube-sized book, like so many signatures, because it doesn't have the strength for that. There's other binding methods for that, none of which I know. Well, maybe I do, but I don't know how to do them well. Oh, see? and thread closest through. It's a little harder to do when the thread is long because there are so many things for it to get caught on while you're tightening it. And it also has a better chance of it twisting and causing a knot. So therefore, you have to remember every once in a while to unravel it like a yo-yo. Let it unravel a little bit. Anyway, there's no reason to show you doing it again and again. This is now, at this point, it's just the exact same thing over and over again. So I'll stop it for now. Oh no. Oh, there we go. And that's it. And now just keep adding them. X, X, and keep pulling. So fast forward a little bit, and I've put most of the signatures on, X to X. This is my very last one. So you just do it like normal. Get that first one through the back. My hands are a little tired. This book's pretty heavy. So glad to be done soon. If you get tired, it's worth taking a break and stopping because you can end up making mistakes. All the hard work that you just did to get this together properly, you can end up ripping something, or so take a break. Don't rush. See that ripped a little bit? I don't really think that's a big deal because it's not too bad. I pulled a little too hard, too close to the edge. But I didn't go too far. I mean, way too far. As you get down, you can pull harder and harder. At the beginning, you should not pull that hard. There's not enough resistance from the other linen tapes to prevent it from ripping through the pages. But it should be easier now. It's hard for me to sew books with thin paper because my hands I have like very sweaty hands, and you can kind of soak into the paper a little bit. And this is thick watercolor paper. Not too thick, but it's 90-pound paper, and it can handle that a lot better than really thin, like book weight paper. See, I'm getting lazy. This is a fake knot. Some of the fakes knot, if it's a fake knot, I call it a fake knot. You can just pull it and it'll come undone. It's risky because even a fake knot, if it's twisted and it looks like a knot and you pull it and it can come out, if this is toward the end of this thread and it's stressed and it's not as strong as it used to be, so pulling that could have broken the thread, which would suck, and it could have made the knot impossible to get out. The beeswax can make knots a little harder to get out. The thread glides along itself a little better, but it can also fill in little cracks where it's hard to tell where the thread is when you're trying to undo a knot. And so this is the very end. This is basically it. I'm going to go through here just like I did on all the other signatures. Tie it tight and clip it off. I can clip it. This is pretty much it. Let's see, am I getting this in the camera? Yeah. You can see that. I'm going to leave it to the previous video. You can trim this book. You have some room to trim to get it down. I like leaving, I don't really care that much. I don't have a guillotine trimmer that goes straight down. You can actually take it to some Kinko's places to have that done. But I like the way it looks like this. This is like, this is my sketchbook without, I never trim, almost never. And I think that's cool. I think that's fine. I don't think it's necessary. Anyway, I'm gonna put just a little tiny dab of glue on each of these, and inside each of these signatures. This will come closer together once the book is bound together. There's going to be a lot of reinforcements on the edge here. Eventually this page is going to be sliced. This will be the first page. Yeah, that's it. Put a little dab of glue on where every place you tied a knot, and that's it.